Hey everybody, my name is Paul Eston Jr., aka Boy Green. I'm the New York Jets digital reporter for Heavy.com, and we're back here late on a Wednesday evening, kicking off at 10 o'clock. We're streaming live simultaneously in 3 different places. It's technology. Don't ask me how it works. I'm just the guy who speaks into a microphone. But 3 different places. The Heavy on Jets Facebook page to over 20,000 of you crazy Jet fans right now. Live streaming as I'm seeing people pour in. My YouTube channel, youtube.com/BoyGreen25 for all kinds of great New York Jets content. And of course, on my Twitter account, #TeamVerified at BoyGreen25. And again, this is an interactive program, so feel free to jump into the comments wherever you happen to be, and we'll try to, sporadically over the next 45 minutes and change, jump into the mailbag and see what you guys got cooking. But I am graced by the presence of an absolute stud muffin, someone that a lot of people would say you'd build your gosh darn franchise around, and that is this man. You may know him already, and quite frankly, heck, you already should. But this is Matt Lombardo, a teammate of mine here at Heavy.com. He is our Heavy on Sports senior NFL reporter, and you can follow him at Matt Lombardo NFL if you're not already. So let's bring him in. Let's add him to the equation. We've made a trade. We've acquired him. He's here. It's Matt Lombardo. Matt, what's up, baby?
Paul, I should have had some more espresso before I hopped on here to match your energy level. This is awesome. And I got to tell you, we're actually broadcasting in not 3, but 4 places.
4.
As you can check it out live simultaneously at my Twitter account, at Matt Lombardo NFL. Pumped to be here. Really busy couple of days for the Jets, and really a fascinating summer for this team on what I think is going to be a really interesting team to follow this fall.
And we're going to dive into that because, of course, Matt Lombardo, you graced your services at Jets-Giants joint practice just a little bit ago, which was fantastic. Of course, they capped that off with the preseason finale against one another at MetLife Stadium. But more on that later. The juicy meat that is the topic of today is, of course, Denzel Mims. Denzel Mims. That's been the topic for some time, but we got a couple of new flavors today. Of course, this week, the Jets had to get to that initial 53. We use initial loosely because, again, of course, there was waiver wires and other things of that nature. But Denzel Mims was on the 53, and Joe Douglas, a general manager of the New York Jets, spoke to the media today, and he said there was never a question. Of course, Denzel Mims was going to be on the 53. So no cut action, but a lot of trade speculation. Matt, we need to dive into your sources and the sources of others. Connor Hughes coming out with some juicy new intel. We should dive into that. And Denzel Mims, again, the guy that the Mike Tomlin quote that Robert Saleh likes to use, the hostage versus, the guy that either wants to be there or doesn't want to be there. And now we have this with Denzel Mims. So let's dive in. There's a lot to dive into here. But, Matt, what are you hearing here on Denzel Mims, wide receiver for the New York Jets, who's not getting the PT he's looking for?
Yeah, Paul, this is kind of one of those very awkward situations where the player could very obviously benefit from a change of scenery. You saw his agent come out after the preseason game, leading into the finale against the Giants, officially requesting a trade. And by all accounts, the Jets are trying to honor that request. Now, they're not going to give away Denzel Mims. He's a guy they picked in the 2nd round. But talking to sources around the league, this is going to be a tall order for Joe Douglas and the Jets to be able to find a trade partner here. And we've seen it over the last couple of days. You see a real playmaker in Laviska Shenault getting dealt to the Carolina Panthers. You see Jalen Reagor getting traded today by the Philadelphia Eagles to the Minnesota Vikings. And talking to my sources inside the NFL, I had an executive tell me that he thinks the market is very limited. Now, I know Connor Hughes reported that a handful of teams, including the Tennessee Titans and the Dallas Cowboys, reached out to the New York Jets. And that makes a lot of sense because everybody I talked to, including our own teammate and former NFL Executive of the Year, Randy Mueller, told me that the Cowboys should shop for a veteran receiver, and Mims would fit that category. But the problem comes in, and this is from a couple of league sources. Denzel Mims isn't somebody that Joe Douglas and Robert Saleh inherited. They handpicked Denzel Mims. He was their guy. He hasn't gone on the field. He hasn't been productive. He hasn't found a role. So if you're basically saying to yourself that this guy can't get on the field here, what indication is there that another team is going to trade an asset to acquire Denzel Mims. So I think when you look around the NFL, maybe a team like the Denver Broncos, who is just absolutely desperate for wide receiver help, maybe you look at a team like the Giants, who had joint practices with the Jets leading into the preseason finale. They have their own issues on their hands with Kenny Golladay, who's really underperformed. Not a lot of depth there behind Kadarius Toney and Wan'Dale Robinson, and Sterling Shepard still getting healthy. I can really only see two or three teams that are in the mix here, Paul. And I think it might be difficult for the Jets to find a trade partner just because of how quickly and how badly this situation has devolved from both the Jets side and Denzel Mims' side of the equation.
Yeah, and really, the real snafu at all of this isn't your classic, request a trade for a player. He just wants to go somewhere new. He just wants to change of scenery. Denzel Mims has been adamant, quite frankly, blunt, that he not only does he want to play, he says, "I'm a starter, baby, and I want to be plugged in." Now, obviously, that's not happening with the New York Jets. You got Corey Davis, $37.5 million in free agency. Garrett Wilson was a top 10 pick. That's the first round wide receiver the Jets have drafted in 21 years, and the highest drafted receiver since, of course, Keyshawn Johnson back in 1996. So he's not passing him. And, oh, yeah, that Elijah Moore kid looks pretty good. So I just don't see where the piece is. So I would imagine there has to be some trepidation from other teams saying, man, if he wants to be a starter there, how the hell is he going to come in as we're recording live on August 31st? The NFL season checks notes is a week in like 2 hours away, technically, next Thursday night. So how could a guy come in that quickly who also had criticisms of not learning the playbook quick enough in a new spot to potentially be traded to? I imagine that has to be affecting some of those trade conversations of teams that they even want to pull a trigger for that guy.
For sure, and he doesn't play special teams either, so
Right.
that doesn't help. If you're going to be a fourth or fifth wide receiver on an NFL roster, you need to contribute on special teams, whether that's as a gunner, whether that's as a returner, in the kick game, the punt game, something. You need to add value, and that's not something Denzel Mims has done to this point. I think that he's a guy that there's certainly potential. I liked him coming out of college. I think he has all of the attributes you would want out of a top wide receiver, but he hasn't put it together in New York. He hasn't been able to climb the depth chart. In fact, he's tumbled down the depth chart. He was benched at one point last year. So again, Paul, it just comes down to, if you handpicked Denzel Mims and you thought that he was going to be worthy of a second round selection, he can't get on the field and he was benched. To me, I think when you see the movement, as I said, around the league at the wide receiver position just in the last 48 hours, I think you're seeing just how hard this is going to be for a move to wind up happening. And I don't think the Jets are going to wind up releasing him. I think that they're going to hold on to him because they have no motivation to. There's no financial windfall. There's no cap space benefit to them cutting Denzel Mims. If they need to keep him as the fourth wide receiver all year, then so be it. Maybe somebody gets hurt near the trade deadline, or a contender feels that they're a wide receiver away and they think that they can get the most out of Denzel Mims because they have a veteran move and he can benefit from not having the pressure of needing to live up to that round two hype. Maybe you see a move go down then. But I think this is a situation that drags on for at least the next several months.
Yeah, let's talk about the moves that have happened since. We saw Laviska Shenault move from the Jacksonville Jaguars to the Carolina Panthers. And Jalen Reagor, there's just something funny about him ending up with Minnesota. Now they have Justin Jefferson and Jalen Reagor after celebrating that clip going viral on Twitter of them celebrating in the draft room that the Eagles passed on him initially. Now they end up with both guys. Go figure, I guess. So on one hand, you could look at the trades that are happening today and say, wow, those teams evaluated the Denzel Mims situation, went, thanks, but no thanks. We're going with Laviska Shenault. We're going with Jalen Reagor. Now, potentially on the other side of the coin, if you really want to squint and look, you're like, wow, look at the value that Jalen Reagor got. More than I think a lot of people would have expected. Man, maybe that means there's a path to Denzel Mims being traded. Is there something
I think
to
the
be
price
said
has
for
to
that
come
squint?
down. I think the price has to come down because,
Okay.
I think that, you look at Howie Roseman, you look at the deal that he pulled off for the safety out of New Orleans, Chauncey Gardner. When you look at the move that they pulled off today, getting a 7th round pick and a conditional 4th or 5th round pick, depending on statistical output from Jalen Reagor, Connor Hughes, my former colleague at NJ.com, now at SNY, he's reporting that the asking price was a 4th round pick. I don't think that was ever reasonable. I had an executive tell me that if it were a 6th or a 7th round pick, they would consider making that type of a deal because you're taking a flyer on a guy with 2nd round value. But I just don't think that the rest of the league is willing to part with a fourth-round pick, especially when you look around the landscape in the NFL, Paul. How many teams are really desperate for wide receiver help? It's one of these positions that we've seen a proliferation of young talent with rookies coming in, regardless of where they're drafted, being immediate contributors. As a top three receiver, we haven't seen that out of Denzel Mims. So I think that if the asking price drops, if the Jets get desperate to move on from Denzel Mims, or he makes it so miserable that situation isn't tenable, and Joe Douglas says, you know what, if the Cowboys offer a sixth-round pick or the Titans offer a seventh-round pick just to get them off of their hands, maybe they make the move at that juncture. But I don't think that the market value is anywhere close to a 4.
Matt, let me ask you this, and you can be blunt. If you just think there's no chance of this, completely shut it down. Now, Joe Douglas has a reputation for getting more than people think, and not just for the Jamal Adams trade. That wins the headlines, but others. Blake Cashman, he went for a pick. Jordan Willis. Some of these players are like, who? Who are these guys? Yet somehow he waved his magic wand and got picks for him. The one that seems to be a potential equivalent here, it's a little different, is Chris Herndon was moved to the Vikings last year, and Joe Douglas slapped a sixth-round pick with Herndon to acquire a fourth-round draft choice. So a combination of both player and pick to get a slightly better pick. Could that be a potential here with Mims? Now, Herndon was originally a fourth-round pick, so that should be factored in, and Mims was a second-round pick, so a little bit of a difference there. But could you see that? If you squint, is that possible for Joe Douglas here down the line?
Sure. In the right situation. I think it's going to have to be a team that feels like they're on the cusp of going to a Super Bowl. Think of the Tampa Bay Buccaneers last year.
Sure.
Chris Godwin goes down in November or December. Now, they're pretty deep. They have, Scotty Miller was there. They still had Mike Evans there. Rob Gronkowski was still healthy as a receiving option at tight end. But if you see a team that's in the midst of a playoff run or in the midst of fighting for their division and their top wide receiver goes down, yeah, I could see the Jets getting a fifth-round pick in exchange for Denzel Mims and a 7. I could see something like that happening. I just think that right now there's no motivation for the rest of the league to take a flyer here, and I think that the book is out, so to speak, on what Denzel Mims is at this stage of his career and where the situation stands with him and the Jets.
Very fair. Again, we are live streaming simultaneously in 4 places right here on our YouTube account, Heavy on Jets Facebook page, my Twitter account, Matt Lombardo's Twitter account. Hey, all of your Twitter accounts, hit that retweet, hit that share. Let's blow this thing up. Like the video, hit subscribe down below for more juicy content. He is our Heavy on Sports senior NFL reporter. Now, Matt, you were just at Jets-Giants joint practice. That's the first time that's happened in 17 years, by the way. So historic, and I'm glad that you were able to circle that on the calendar and said, gonna be at that one. And first off, just in general, I know that you just dropped an article, and by the way, we'll share that in the comments down below for heavy.com. It is a little bit of your In the Trenches, a national NFL column, and some other notes and quotes that you guys can check out. And included in that, of course, which we'll dive into here in just a few minutes, are the 4 Jets standouts heading into week 1 that caught your eye. But just in general, what was the atmosphere like of Jets-Giants for the first time in 17 years? And 17 years ago, it got nasty. Jeremy Shockey, of course, anytime you add Jeremy Shockey, that ingredient to the recipe, it gets a little explosive, and it got pretty fiery. I'm not so sure we got that same level of vitriol this time around.
We didn't. To be honest with you, Paul, I've covered the league since 2011. I've seen my share of joint practices, whether it's, Giants, Patriots, whether it's Eagles, Ravens, whether it's Eagles, Patriots. This didn't have that same fire. And I think that was almost by design, right? And before practice, you heard Brian Dable talk about how they wanted to kind of rein in. We all saw what happened on Hard Knocks, right? We all saw what happened with the Colts and Lions joint practices and all of the fights. Deuce Staley losing his voice as a coach. Aaron Donald, double swinging the helmets at opposing players.
Yeah.
Should probably be suspended, by the way, for like 6 or 8 weeks. If that happened in a game, it'd be like an 8-game suspension. But I think that both coaches, Brian Dable for the Giants and Robert Saleh for the Jets, made a point to their players to say, listen, we're going to be competitive, but we're going to get good work in, and we're going to try to stay, within the confines of a practice. And what was really interesting, I had never seen this before, and I think this speaks to the proximity of the Jets and Giants facilities. They're only a short bus ride away. They both play for the city of New York. They're both, headquartered in New Jersey. Both teams gathered for a huddle on one of the practice fields, a joint huddle, not both teams on either side.
Right.
And they broke it, and they said New York at the end. So I think that there was a little bit of a camaraderie, if nothing else. There wasn't a lot of, trash talking. There weren't the fights. And you talked to Robert Saleh after practice. It sounds like both he and Brian Dable want to make this a regular event, maybe even an annual thing, whether it be in Florham Park or in East Rutherford. Again, because of everything we talked about, both coaching staff seems to get along. There's a proximity there. These teams know each other, and it's convenient because you play each other in the preseason finale every year anyway, so you can circle it on your calendar. And I think it makes a lot of sense. And Paul, I really believe whether it's in 2025 when the new CBA can be ratified and changed into an 18-game regular season, whether it's in 2030 at the actual end of this CBA, I do think there's a very good chance you see the preseason go away completely. And I think that you are going to see more of these joint practices next year. You're going to see even more of them if the preseason goes away because coaches see more value here because they're much more competitive. You don't need to share the game film. It doesn't go to the other 30 teams. So you can watch someone like Wink Martindale open up the playbook and throw every blitz package imaginable at Joe Flacco. You can see the Jets run some interesting routes in the passing game because it's not on film. Not every team gets to study it. And you get to evaluate both rosters. Robert Saleh, I think, put it best after practice when he said, when they were in Atlanta, when Atlanta was in New Jersey for the joint practices, he told his team point blank, flat out, there are people in our facility who are wearing Jets uniforms today who just made the Falcons roster because of what they put on film during those 3 joint practices. And I think the same thing has the chance to happen, whether it's later this week, during the season, whenever, for the Giants and the Jets seeing each other and getting that good work in together. So it certainly wasn't like the fiery, spirited, fight-filled practice that you saw 16 years ago. But I think there was a lot of value in that joint workout, and you're going to see a lot more of those around the league as the years go on.
And by the way, you were right. Saleh was a prophet of sorts. Chuma Edoga, the Jets' former third-round pick, was claimed off of waivers by the Atlanta Falcons. So a prophet of sorts. And by the way, 7 Jets today, which is somewhat unbelievable. It just shows you the changing of the times for the New York Jets. And first off, that anyone would want Jet players, that are leaving the team. And the fact of the matter is, I saw a couple national reporters kind of pick this up. You can interpret this in one of 2 ways. A lot of people seem to be impressed with that number. Like, wow, 7 guys today and 12 players since they had the 90-man, 11. Yeah, since the 90-man construct, they would cut and immediately signed with another NFL team, which, again, is a wow number there. But a couple of the national people picked it up and said, or the Jets cut the wrong guy. And other NFL teams like, what are the Jets doing over there? Let's bring him in and slip through the cracks. So I guess you can interpret it in whichever way you'd like.
Yeah, I'm kind of in the school of the former rather than latter. I think when you start to see teams claim 5, 6, 7, 8 guys, 11 guys, as is the case for the Jets over the last 3 weeks, off of a roster, I think it speaks to the depth and the talent level on that roster because, listen, even though it's the Jets, even though it doesn't matter, I think, what the record is, there are only 32 front offices. There are only 32 general managers. There are only 32 head coaches. These are the best people in their craft in the entire industry building these rosters. I don't think you're going to make the mistake that has 6 guys, 7 guys who couldn't make your roster get claimed because they're that much better, than what's available or because what you have on the roster is that much worse. I think it just speaks to the talent level on the roster completely that, there were 7 guys that were this close to making the 53 and wound up getting claimed elsewhere. I think it speaks to the talent of those players and the depth of the players they have on the roster moving forward from here.
We're just getting word in that Matt Lombardo has been officially invited to the Jets cookout this year after talking about the talent. Yes, excellent. That invite should be in the mail here shortly for Matt Lombardo, our NFL insider. Well, Matt, let's dive into the Jets-Giants joint practices. And again, a very intriguing part. Again, we're going to drop the link here in the comments. You guys can just go to heavy.com as well or Matt Lombardo's Twitter account. We talked about the 4 Jet standouts. Again, Matt Lombardo was at Jets-Giants joint practice, and he wrote about some of his observations, including players that stood out in his mind. And I think they're fascinating for a lot of reasons. And I'm going to kind of skip around here. I won't go in order of the list. I want to immediately go to Ty Johnson. Now, Ty Johnson was the darling of Jets offseason last year, a guy they took away from the Detroit Lions initially. He looked like a guy like, wow, the Jets did draft Michael Carter in the 4th round, but Ty Johnson has an opportunity here, a path to PT. Now, unfortunately, Ty Johnson got the nickname Stonehands during the season, had some bad reps where a lot of people said, oh boy, that Ty Johnson stock is crashing and plummeting down to planet Earth. Yet, despite all of that, Matt, he stood out to you. And guess what? He stood out to the Jets. He made their 53-man roster as a guy they really like. So talk to us about what stood out about Ty Johnson that day and just really in general, the player of Ty Johnson, because not only did you see it, but the Jets team did as well.
Yeah, Paul, there were a couple of plays, and the one that really jumped out was early in practice during an 11-on-11 period where Johnson kind of snuck out into the flat and caught a pass along the sidelines. And it just seemed like he shifted into another gear and had a nice little juke along the sideline against Adoree Jackson, turned it upfield for a big gain. And it was that sort of vision and suddenness as a receiver out of the backfield that jumped out at me right away. And I was like, well, I know that they have Breece Hall, who might be the most talented incoming rookie running back in the league right now. I know they have Michael Carter, who they drafted high a year ago, but Hall seems like one of these really interesting rotational change of pace running backs where you could have him in the slot. You can have him out there in two wide receiver sets where you're not really, or two running back sets rather, where you're not sure, whether he's going to catch the ball out of the backfield or run the ball off tackle. You can move him around a little bit. So that kind of jumped out at me, just that one play early on. I think it showed a lot of what the Jets probably saw in him when they added him to the roster in the first place and decided to keep him this summer.
Let's stay on the offense. Let's get a little hog molly action in here, if I may. Nate Herbig, a guy that the Jets, speaking of all this claiming of waiver wires earlier, they swiped him off the Philadelphia Eagles after they let him go. And according to all the beat reporters, he has risen to become the top interior offensive lineman, both getting guard and center reps in. Through some of the preseason games, he has really raised a few eyebrows, it seems like, in the building. And, of course, that of Matt Lombardo. I know the hog mollies, the offensive linemen don't normally get the spotlight, Matt, but you went out of your way to make sure you pounded the table to make sure offensive line representation was equal in your article.
Hog mollies. When did Dave Gettleman jump on this call?
That's true.
I think Herbig, he really showed out that day, both during the individual drills and then during the one-on-ones against the Giants defensive lineman. There were two reps in particular. One against Ryden Anderson, who was a defensive end for the Giants, tried to put a bull rush on him, and Herbig just dug in, and it was like Anderson hit a stone wall. It didn't go anywhere, and I just sat there and I thought, wow, you start to see that in pass protection. Nate Herbig's going to be a best friend to Zach Wilson if he plays like that during games. And another one where you saw Shane Ximenez try to do a swim move on him, and he just swatted away and kind of swatted him down to the ground. I thought that Herbig really acquitted himself nicely. And you look at the versatility, being able to play both guard spots and at center. Not only does it provide value for the Jets in terms of if somebody would go down, he's kind of an insurance policy, but that versatility really translates to being a high-end offensive lineman because you've learned so many different positions. You can kind of deploy all of those traits, and you saw him do that in that practice.
Let's do a quick detour away from your standouts. This man did not crack the list, however. He was a guy that all the beat reporters were taking videos of because it was really his first opportunity of getting some real reps. That's Duane Brown, the old man of the room, the veteran offensive tackle, where unfortunately Mekhi Becton goes down with a very serious knee injury. By the way, good news, quick detour, another detour on our detour. Joe Douglas giving a tip of the cap to Mekhi Becton, saying surgery went well. The prognosis from the doctors is going to make a full recovery, and long-term football prognosis looks good. Of course, he is still out for the season. They already placed him on injured reserve, but that started the entire rest of the dominoes where the Jets' plan was for George Fant to be their blindside protector. Well, you know what? Crap happens, as the kids say. So they had to flip him to right tackle and sign Duane Brown and bring him into the fold. You kind of got your first taste of him. We got our first taste of him, quite frankly, in the Giants game in terms of offensive line continuity ahead of week one in the 2022 season in general. What did you see out of Duane Brown? A lot of people are curious about this guy who is a reigning Pro Bowler from last season.
Yeah, Paul, as I reported, even before the Jets signed Duane Brown, they were looking at him at left tackle. That there were real concerns in that building about George Fant getting fully back up to speed and healthy. He wasn't really a part of the offseason program at all. And I think there was some concern from a health standpoint and picking up the offense and the intricacies of the blocking schemes. The plan all along was to move him to right tackle. And when they wound up eventually signing Duane Brown, Brown was going to be the left tackle. That's just the way this thing came about. And you watched him against the Giants, and I thought he just looked like that steady veteran offensive lineman, held his own out there. And you watched him during warmups against some of the other Jets linemen, and it was a man amongst boys, right? I mean, here's a guy who's one of the top at his craft. Again, I don't know that he's in his prime at this stage of his career, but he's coming off a Pro Bowl year. I think he does have a little bit left in the tank. And I think that he's a guy that, if nothing else, brings a lot of veteran stability. And alongside someone like Herbig, could really help stabilize an offensive line that's in desperate need of it and can really help Zach Wilson take that next step.
All right, let's. Speaking of Zach Wilson, unfortunately, when you arrived, Zach Wilson was MIA in terms of actually participating on the field, of course, unfortunately, from that Eagles injury he suffered in the preseason debut. No update from both Robert Saleh or Joe Douglas earlier today on his status. So week one is still very much up in the air, but it does seem to lean outside of some miraculous recovery that Joe Flacco will be the one that's shooting up week one. And Matt, I need you to be blunt with us. All the Jet fans are watching in and commenting. I see all you crazy people. We'll get to some mailbag questions at the end here, but Joe Flacco, how did he look not only in that joint practice game, but the game in general? There looks like some bad Joe Flacco happening out there, which seems to not be what everyone was reporting. They said that Joe Flacco had looked pretty steady Eddie throughout most of camp since he had to take over, but that did not seem to be the case during the joint practice against some of those exotic blitz schemes.
No, it was rough. And, you could tell that Wink Martindale kind of threw the kitchen sink at him and, emptied out the playbook. I mean, you talked to Robert Saleh after that practice, and he basically said that, they have an exotic pressure scheme and that Martindale has a book of blitz packages, and he threw them all at Joe Flacco. And I thought that offense was really out of sync. There was a series where, on one play, the ball's tipped over the middle, almost intercepted. Another play where I'm standing on the sideline and the ball bounces in front of me with the nearest Jet wide out, maybe 4 yards away and 3 yards into the middle of the field. It just looks like they couldn't really get their footing underneath them against the Giants defense. This is the Giants defense. I mean, listen, they are kind of what they are. They're a young group. There's some young pieces, but it's not like you were going up against the Raiders front seven. It's not like you were going up against the 49ers defense or the Packers defense. They just didn't look ready to play that day. And I think that there are some nice pieces to the Jets offense. I think Breece Hall and Michael Carter are going to be a really fun duo. I think they both are explosive running backs. Garrett Wilson looks like he has the chance to step in and be an immediate contributor and a real game changer based on what he put on film in college. They're going to have to really hold on. They're going to have to hold on for dear life until whenever Zach Wilson can get back, whether it's week 2, week 3, week 4, whenever. And the schedule maker didn't do them any favors because you got to go up against the Baltimore defense at home, try to outscore Lamar Jackson in that offense. Over that stretch, you have the Cincinnati Bengals, you have the Pittsburgh Steelers, who, while there's a question mark at quarterback, it's still a really dominant defense, especially in the passing game, and a ground and pound Steelers offense with great wide receivers. They're going to be tested early on, and they just need to hang on here. I mean, there's not much margin for error in that division anyway. When you look at a prohibitive Super Bowl favorite, in my opinion, in the Buffalo Bills, and a really good and really talented Miami Dolphins roster, top to bottom, there's not much of a margin for error there. But it just looks like they're going to take their lumps with Joe Flacco, and I think they're going to need to scheme their way around Flacco the best they can, committing to the running game, involving CJ Uzoma, using underneath routes to Corey Davis, not asking Flacco to do too much, and putting it on your defense. Because, I talked to an executive before we jumped on the air tonight just to get his 10,000-foot view on the Jets, someone who, works in an NFC front office. And he told me that he really likes the roster. He thinks that they have really solid playmakers on both sides of the ball, and he loves the defense. He loves what they did in the draft. He loves Sauce Gardner, loves Jermaine Johnson, thinks there's a lot of key pieces you can build around on that defensive side of the ball. And, Paul, that's kind of my long-winded, roundabout sourced way of saying that if the Jets are going to survive that first month, it's going to be because of the defense carrying them rather than Joe Flacco doing anything to drag them across the finish line.
We will get to that defense. I want to throw this up on the big screen for everybody. Let's throw this up. This coming from our good buddy Rich Cimini of ESPN earlier today on the old Flight Deck podcast. Here was the quote, and I found it very interesting. Wanted to tweet it out. People inside the building, this is from Rich, are really gushing about Jets running back Breece Hall. They think he could be one of the best players on the team already in terms of pure talent. A bold claim, but some bold words there. Again, that's coming from inside the building from some people with the New York Jets. Again, I get it that sometimes evaluating running backs in practice and joint practices can sometimes be difficult, Matt. But are you getting that same sense from people about Breece Hall? Again, he is considered one of the favorites for the Offensive Rookie of the Year, the highest drafted running back by the Jets in 31 years. There's a lot of expectations. Is it all warranted?
I think it is. I mean, you watch him in college, just a really explosive, elusive running back. And I think that he fits what the Jets really like to do on offense. And I think that you look at the chemistry that he had before Zach Wilson's injury with the quarterback. I think he's going to burst on the scene. And I think that the floor for him is somewhere around 850 to 1,000 yards. And I think that he can be a guy as a rookie who, bare minimum, scores 6 or 7 touchdowns. I mean, I think this kid has the potential to be the focal point of the Jets offense. And that's with all the talent they have at wide receiver at this point, right? Especially early, if you're going to lean on your running game to get by with your backup quarterback, Breece Hall is going to figure to be a major part of that. And would you be surprised, Paul, if you look up at after the first 4 weeks, if he has 3 100-yard plus rushing games?
Well, not at all. Especially again, some of the defenses they play are obviously quite good. They play the entire AFC North. That's the first time they've done that in schedule making history for the New York Jets to open up against a division like that. Again, you have at home against the Ravens, on the road against Cleveland, back at home for the Bengals. Oh yeah, that team that was in the Super Bowl, and then Week 4 at Pittsburgh. While the quarterback situation could be somewhat muddied with the Kenny Pickett, Mitch Trubisky thing, that defense certainly isn't muddied. You got elite playmakers at every level with TJ Watt, Minka Fitzpatrick, and Highsmith as well. So they got a lot of talent on that side of the ball, and so do all those defenses. But again, I think leaning on the running game may be the way, as you mentioned earlier, that instead of hoping Joe Flacco can save the day, defense and running game potentially unlocking something different here, which beautifully segues us. Matt, it seems like you've done this before. Let's work back into those standouts for your heavy article and a couple defenders making the list. And I don't know how we've gotten this far into this podcast without mentioning the one and only Ahmad Gardner, who some would like to call more affectionately known as Sauce Gardner. He, of course, was a standout for you, and that seems to be a common occurrence for anyone that attends Jets practice.
Yeah, and I'll preface this by saying that I didn't really get to see a lot of Sauce Gardner because Daniel Jones barely looked on his side of the field. And for a rookie, first round, albeit a first round pick, but for a rookie cornerback to have that kind of an impact on a quarterback's decision making in a joint practice or a game, whatever the setting is, I think that underscores his talent level. I think that underscores the amount of respect that the Giants offense and Daniel Jones had for Gardner and his coverage ability. Down in the red zone, he was locked down. Whether he was on David Sills or Kenny Golladay, those guys weren't getting 6 inches of separation. So I think that the Jets rightfully inside that building are really excited about Sauce Gardner. You can see why they targeted him so high in the draft. And I think that he's one of these guys that, you're going to look up at the end of the year and you're going to have him very much in the mix for Defensive Rookie of the Year. I think he's going to be that good.
And man, he has been special. And that, by the way, again, because you got kind of a small taste being at the one joint practice between the Jets and Giants. Guess what? That has translated to the preseason games. He is the least targeted corner in all of football. Like, again, for a rookie to garner that kind of respect is interesting. I know once we get to the regular season, teams, there's only one way to find out if Sauce is the real deal. You dip your toe in the pond and see if you could get away with it. And again, he will get challenged. The Jets have a lot of talented corners. DJ Reed, if he ends up being healthy enough to play in that Ravens game along with Michael Carter II. But there's only one way to find out about the Sauce, and we're going to sauce find out about him here sooner rather than later.
Think about the receivers. Think about the receivers that he's going to see right out of the chute, right? I mean, you look at Pittsburgh, whether it's Deontay Johnson, Chase Claypool, or a fellow rookie in George Pickens.
Sure.
That secondary is going to be taxed, and you're going to get a real quick view of how good Sauce Gardner is. You have Jamar Chase in that mix, or on the other side, if you're not traveling with Jamar Chase, T. Higgins is over there. Mm-hmm. Maybe the best wide receiver duo in all of football. You got Lamar Jackson, who we know can sling it all over the yard. It's just going to be one of these really interesting. Amari Cooper, I
Yeah.
get it that it's
Yeah.
Jacoby Brissett. It's not Deshaun Watson, so the quarterback play isn't going to be the level that you thought it was when the schedule first came out. But man, you're going to find out exactly just how good Sauce Gardner is at this stage of his career right out of the gate in the first quarter of the season, where you're seeing maybe 5 of the top 10 wide receivers in the entire sport.
And an interesting pairing to the final standout from your article. Again, that is available in the comments down below. And also, if you just go to heavy.com, again, Matt Lombardo, standouts and takeaways. Again, he was at Jets Giants joint practice. And that last one is Jermaine Johnson. How soon until we find out how good he is? Because, again, this is an unusual first world problem for the Jets, is that when you draft a guy in the first round, they are normally an immediate impact guy, a guy that you need to rely on and lean on to have great success at the next level. And with the depth of the Jets defensive line, it seems hard to believe he will start, but he will be a part of that rotation. He stood out to you, but how quickly will we be able to determine how good this kid is?
Well, I think he's going to have to play his way onto the field, right? Whether it's, in practice during the week, making some splash plays in the opener against the Ravens. I think he's one of these guys that you can stand him up and move him around as an outside linebacker. You can put his hand in the dirt because he has really good bend coming off the edge. He has an explosive first step. That's what jumped out to me, just how explosive he was at the snap, how quickly, even in run support, getting into the backfield, stopping the run. That's going to help him get on the field because everybody loves pass rushers. Everybody loves sacks. But the old mantra of defensive linemen and linebackers is stop the run on the way to the quarterback. Jermaine Johnson does a really good job of doing that. So I think he'll get on the field, and I think he's one of these guys. I don't think he's going to be Sauce Gardner playing 90% of the defensive snaps right away, but I think it's going to be one of these slow burns and builds into him being a full-time player at some point sooner rather than later.
Guys, we're under the 10-minute mark here. Again, we're going to go for about 45 minutes here. And right now on my ticker, it's about 37 minutes in. So feel free, if you have any questions for the handsome stud himself, Matt Lombardo, feel free to drop them wherever you're watching, Facebook, YouTube, Twitter, whatever you prefer. And there's a couple of different ways you can do that. Feel free on youtube.com. You can super chat, where you throw a tip at our tin cup here and your comment brights up in a big shiny color that I can't possibly miss and guarantees that your question gets answered here by Matt here again in the next 8 minutes and change to make sure you get that on the docket. So feel free to start pouring those in, guys, for questions for Matt, and we'll be getting to those here momentarily. So I'll allow a few minutes here for you guys to get those in, and then we'll go somewhat rapid fire here with Matt before we sign off. Matt, another player I do have to get to, and he also had a video viral from the Jets Giants joint practice, is Carl Lawson. He had a ruptured Achilles in the Packers joint practice last year, which had a lot of Jet fans hoping that Carl Lawson would be bubble wrap for any of these joint practices that ended up happening with both the Giants and Falcons respectively. He showed a little bit of burst in some of those one-on-one drills, which were really fun on social media to see. On Twitter, I think Dan Dugan of The Athletic was the one who shared them, where it was Jets pass rusher versus Giants offensive lineman, and they reversed it and did it the other way. That's one where people went, ooh, okay, the explosiveness still seems to be there. Again, I don't think we get the true test until the regular season to really see it, but people say he was the best player on the field last year. Did it look like he was still pretty good this time around, Matt?
Yeah, Paul, I really have to admit here, I spent a lot of my time on the Jets side, where it was the Giants pass rushers against the Jets offensive linemen.
Okay.
So I didn't get to see a whole lot of Lawson in the one-on-one drills, but I know he's really highly regarded around the league. He's one of these guys that people think could really take his game to another level this year if he can stay healthy and stay on the field. So I hesitate to really get into what I saw out of him, because I was there. I wanted to see Duane Brown. I wanted to see, Font. I wanted to see Herbig. I want to see how that offensive line was going to shape up. So my apologies. I didn't make it over to that side of the field all that often or enough to really see what Lawson was up to over there.
I appreciate the candidness. We've had guests on the show go, oh, man, yeah, Carl Lawson looked like the second coming of the Messiah. Oh, great to hear, even if they didn't see it. So I love the honesty there. All right, let's jump into some of these comments. I see John Patron, which, again, thank you so much for your service as a former military guy. My father spent 20 years in the Navy. My brother spent 4 years in the Marines. I was supposed to go into the military before getting into all this. So your service means the world, John. And I always tell you that when you jump in here. Hello, Paul and Matt.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you as well. Hello, Paul and Matt. Speaking of Sauce, think about the receivers he faces in practice. Not bad. What's the opinion of our practice squad and offensive line? Well, a lot of questions here, but I will say right off the top, in terms of the receivers, Matt, it seems like it's a world difference over the last couple of years. That seemed to be an emphasis point for Joe Douglas, because if you think about it, again, Corey Davis was the entire team really is his acquisition. There are few morsels left from former general managers, especially after the latest cuts that just came in. But you think about Elijah Moore. Some people would believe he's wide receiver one. Garrett Wilson, obviously top 10 pick, highly thought of. Braxton Berrios brought back. We talked about Denzel Mims, who's there too. Corey Davis and so many others. That is a good test. That actually I know Connor Hughes hates this. Your old teammate there, but iron sharpens iron. I know he hates that line, but I guess there may be a little credence here.
No, I think there is. And I'll just go on record to say that this is the best wide receiving core the Jets have fielded in at least a decade. From top to bottom, from talent, from depth. You brought up Elijah Moore. The guy just gets behind defenses. He has that next level game breaking speed that takes the top off of a secondary. Garrett Wilson is a guy that, is going to average probably 15 or more yards per reception. He can stretch the field as well. And I really like Corey Davis. And I think that what you saw Joe Douglas do over the past 2 off seasons, I think it's exactly how you set your young quarterback up for success. You get the possession, red zone type of big bodied target receiver in Corey Davis. You drop him into that offense. Yeah, you draft the playmaker in Elijah Moore at the same time, so you have 2 weapons. But this year you saw them go out and you bring in CJ Uzoma, who worked wonders for Joe Burrow. The experience of going to a Super Bowl at tight end. I know we're talking about the wide receivers here, but I firmly believe, having watched what the Eagles did when they went to a Super Bowl, watching what the Bengals were able to build with Joe Burrow, seeing what Philly did, continuing with another young quarterback and bringing in Dallas Goedert, pairing a young quarterback with a dynamic, reliable tight end, to me, is almost as valuable as the playmakers on the outside at wide receiver. Because even when you're not getting separation on the outside, if you have a tight end on 3rd and 7 that you can throw a 6-yard out pattern to and he gains 9 yards because he's, tough to bring down and he's going to catch, 80 balls, he's only going to drop 2 or 3. Having that reliable security blanket as a tight end, to me, is massively important to a young quarterback. And the Jets have 2 of them now. So, and you look at the Patriots copied the same strategy with Mac Jones in their offseason when they brought in Jonnu Smith and Hunter Henry a year ago. So I think the receivers are one thing, but having the playmakers at wide receiver and the really good pass-catching tight ends, to me, that sets the table or the ingredients for a really well-rounded passing game and going to really help out Zach Wilson.
And I've seen a bunch of people ask this question, so I'll combine it together. And speaking of combining, what about a wide receiver and a tight end? Lawrence Cager, a guy that, quite frankly, as a wide receiver, could not crack the Jets roster over the last couple of years. So much so he went to the Cleveland Browns, and he was floating on their practice squad. Comes back, and Rex Hogan took credit, but also credited the rest of the room, the assistant general manager of the Jets, as his brainchild, saying, hey, Lawrence, I think your better shot of making this team is transitioning from wide receiver to tight end. He did that, and not only did it successfully this offseason, he's on the 53-man roster, which is a miraculous turnaround here. And again, it's just really a really cool story, it seems, from all these comments we're getting in here. A lot of people asking about Cager.
Yeah, I think that he's another one of those big-bodied targets, and you can move him around. You can put him in line as a tight end. You can move him out into the slot where you're going to have the size advantage against a slot cornerback. He's a physical guy. We've seen that over and over again. I love seeing stories like that where guys just find a way, right? You have some of the tools as a wide receiver, but maybe there's some consistency lapses and those sort of things. You dedicate yourself to blocking and, showing that you can be an asset as a run blocker and in the passing game. You find a way onto the roster as a tight end. So I think that he's a guy that has some upside for them as well.
All right, Matt, it's been a beautiful near 44 minutes and change here of having you on the show, answering live questions, talking about a variety of different topics. Of course, talking about several of your articles, and everyone, of course, can read all your articles at heavy.com. Matt, is there anything in your Jets notebook that we did not get to that we want to address, like a final, like almost PTI-ish, to catch up on anything we may have missed here, on anything Jetsland that you wanted to get out during this conversation? I know you get to join all the heavy Facebook pages, and we drag you around talking about all the different teams, but in terms of your Jets Nuggets, anything we missed here?
No, I enjoy it. And again, I think it just comes down to there should be a lot of excitement among Jets fans for the youth on both sides of the ball. That really stuck with me in the conversation that I had, just how highly the rest of the league thinks of the young skill players on offense and now on defense as well. It's a really brutal division in the AFC East, but I think the Jets have the pieces in place to surprise some people this year and a really strong foundation for years to come.
Again, the invite remains intact after that last comment. For one, Matt Lombardo. Again, everybody make sure you follow him on Twitter at Matt Lombardo NFL for all the latest news and nuggets, breaking stories, articles, insight. Again, one of the best follows on Twitter to get all that juicy content, which we all enjoy. I want to thank all of you for joining us. And of course, you, Matt, thanks for carving out the time here on a Wednesday night.
Paul, thanks for having me. I really enjoyed it. Hopefully we can do it again soon.
We definitely will. Again, Matt Lombardo from heavy.com right here on the channel. Thanks, everybody.